The thing about Sandra was that she was simple in a sense. She didn't want big things, didn't want fancy, didn't want a lot of, materialistic. She never even thought about that kind of stuff. So that was one of the things. But the real part of her is that she's naturally a lover. I think the same thing could be said for Sally. The same thing can be said for Heather. Truthfully, that's the way I feel. And this is something that she cares about everything. I care about a lot of things, but not to the degree that she does. It's amazing.
I've been waiting for Danny for years. I wait for him to come home. I wait for him for this. I wait for him for that. But he's well worth waiting for.
Oh, thanks. If you remember that. What's interesting is, we're first cousins, and Sandra's side is the Levine side, whereas we have a common Steinberg tree, and my side is Wasserstrom. Our fathers were brothers.
My grandparents are Bertha and Harris Levine, and my grandfather had a fruit and vegetable truck that he peddled, a cart, and then he ended up having a store called Harris Levine Produce, and he sold wholesale produce to the local grocery stores. That's what his business was. And my grandma and grandpa had a very large, lovely home on 656 Joliet Street in LaSalle, and we congregated there every Sunday, the whole family, in a huge dining room filled with all the aunts and uncles and cousins. And we just had a fabulous time together. We were an unusually close-knit family.
And lots of card playing.
Our family played a lot. Every Sunday at my grandmother's house, there were a couple games going. The men played rummy, and then we also played bridge. And as far as my cousins, we were very close. And Marcia and I today are almost like sisters. We're so close.
How many years are different between you
Marcia,
and Mickey?
Mickey
was
3 years and 3 months older than I.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the fact that he was a boy and you were a girl, so you didn't have, like we had, we all played the same sports, so if we were...
Mickey and I were quite close, but then we fought a lot. Also, he would hit me, he'd use his little knuckle and hit my arm. And then he got scolded a lot for that. But my father we did get spanked. So
welcome to
Mickey
the club.
got spanked, and then when he got spanked, I'd always say, "Don't spank him, Dad." We'd kind of stick up for each other. One time at the dinner table, I got mad at Mickey for some reason or other. I threw a fork at him. He ended up with 4 little holes on his forehead, and did I get spanked for that? I guess I deserved it. But then he started sticking up for me. "Don't spank her, Dad," And a lot of other things happened in my house when I grew up. I had friends that were always over at my house. A lot of sleepovers, and we had in the basement like a room where all the kids would congregate and have a good time. We even had a little package of cigarettes hidden down there that we tried. I never liked it. Got all musty. And we played hide and seek all over the house. All the kids. They'd even hide in the linen closets and things like that. My parents were very tolerant, and all my friends loved my mother and father. My mother was a wonderful cook, and she always had home-baked goodies all the time. All the time. She always had a fresh cake and this and that, and I always stood by her side while she cooked. I loved watching her, and I learned how to make pies, and doing things watching her. And my one job when I was a child was mashing the potatoes. And she had this fabulous masher, like wires and stuff. You can't get them like that anymore.
We lived in a very small house There was 3 boys, my mom and dad. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. And of course, in those days, we burned coal for heat and had a what's called a monkey stove, where we had a heat drill and water, and we used coal and wood for that. It was kind of primitive, but it was still great. We played every game there was: baseball, basketball, football. We played in the streets. We played in garages when the weather was bad. We even played in the house. We had a little hoop put up in a doorpost so we could shoot baskets and that type of thing. We had some guys over all the time, card games and things in it. We had a terrific childhood. In wintertime, we'd all go sleigh riding and call sledding in those days and that type of thing. And you'd go for miles, and it was a great experience. We got along terrific, except my older brother and I, we would fight now and then. My younger brother and I got along for some reason or other without any incidents that I can remember. But we also had another family in Chicago. Besides my dad's mom and dad, who lived next door to us, we went to see Mom's mother and father. And Miss Mary Wasserstrom was her name, and his name was Louis Wasserstrom. So that's how Louis got his name. He died very young, had a heart attack, but he had a dress business, and he even brought the business to a little town called Oglesby, which is near where Sandra comes from, LaSalle, and that's where Mom began her courtship with Dad. And then when they moved back to Chicago, he would drive up every weekend, and this is in, the early 1920s. Well, he got hit by a streetcar, so I remember Grandma always said, she said, Ethel, you better marry this guy before he kills himself. And so they got married. And they were totally in love. It was, Dad was just devoted to her. And Mom worked in the store full time. And we had a maid. That's because Mom had to work all the time. It was a great place to grow up. Spring Valley had at that time 2 whorehouses. One was for the black folks and one had white prostitutes. It had 37 taverns. We had the shul. We had 3 or 4 Catholic churches, so we all kind of like intermingled. Saturday, as I said, my dad worked. They worked till maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And we would join them after we get to be old enough, of course. But then there was the band concert in Spring Valley every Saturday night, and people would come in the store. Everybody knew everybody, and of course my dad would open up the store on Sunday. So we'd go down the store with him, and then one thing we used to always do was he would take us and go on long walks down by the creek and up the woods and back around, and he loved being with us. He would take us fishing quite often, and he loved to fish, and that's how Charlie got his. We'd go on vacations every summer. Dad would take off. We'd go to Wisconsin, up to Minnesota, 1940, before the war. The World's Fair was in San Francisco, and Mom's family was in California at that time. Her 2 sisters and her brother all moved out there. We drove all the way in a 39 Packard, no air conditioning, and we went with another family, the Rosenzweigs. They were real close friends to Mom and Dad, and he had two daughters. And Jerry would sit in our car sometimes, and we'd sit in their cars, switch back and forth So anyhow, I guess Mishy said something a little bit disparaging to say we were parked somewhere. We were on one side of a very busy highway, and Rosenzweig on the other side, and Charlie was with them. And something was said, so Charlie gets insulted, gets out of the car, head down, and walks across this busy intersection. Got struck by a guy going maybe 65, 70 miles an hour, head on. And I'll never forget seeing Charlie flying through the air. He came down and landed on the hood of the car that hit him. And he thought the worst. We all wore tzitzis, he had them on. He didn't have a broken bone. You know, there's some cuts and bruises. Can you imagine being hit at that speed? And so we stayed over Shabbos in Salt Lake City that time, and then we drove on. He was fine.
Well, I went to Hebrew school twice a week at our little synagogue in LaSalle, B'nai Moshe, and I was the only girl in the class, and I did actually better in Hebrew than the few boys that were in the class. And I did have a bat mitzvah at our synagogue with 2 other girls who lived in Ottawa, and I gave a big long speech about Moses, Maimonides, and 13 attributes of God, or I remember all that. And I enjoyed going to the synagogue for the holidays, and for Friday night services we'd go. And we always sat, you know, in the same seats and stuff, but we had a pretty full congregation when I was growing up.
I don't think the women or females or young girls experienced anti-Semitism that a boy or a man would experience. As I said, I had 2 battles that I remember distinctly. Everett Caldwell, who beat the daylights out of me because he called me a Jew, and I started after him, but I should have known better. He was bigger and stronger. And then the other time, Artie Kelly, who was, the town was pretty much predominantly Catholic, and he called me a sheenie or something, and I took out after him and fought right in the park. We had a whole crowd watch this, and it was a good battle. But I knocked him down, and he didn't get up. And then that was the only time. One other time in the Army, I had a bad experience where it was called a dirty Jew by a guy, and I punched him in the nose and ended up doing KP and latrine, and had to go outside and do all the windows in the barracks. The sergeant felt but that was just standing up for what we thought, you know, they should have probably done in a different manner. Today, when someone says to me, you know, well, did you Jew him down? And I said, wait a minute, I don't know what your religion is, but I'm Jewish. So if you're Scotch, I can say, why did you Scotch him down? And so that's how I would treat people today, with probably a little more reasoning rather than physically trying to prove something. That's what it was. But we were always proud of our Judaism. Went to a public school. When we got out of school, after you were 6 years old, you had to go to Cheder. We had a rabbi, we had a shul that my grandfather built, which is where we still go for Rosh Hashanah now. He and some other men, of course. After regular school, we spent 2 hours at Cheder, had different rabbis, and one of the more interesting rabbis was he kept live fish in his bathtub, which he would use to make, you know, gefilte fish from the raw fish. Anyhow, I didn't realize this until I went to the bathroom one time, and I heard the water, you know, and I looked in. There was all these fish floating around in his bathtub. It was kind of a revelation. I told that to Charlie, and he went, and none of us could really believe it. The rabbi that we had was also a shochet back at Grandma's house. Grandpa had grapevines, full garden, chicken coop with live chickens, obviously. So we used to have to go in there. I think it was either on Thursday, and each of us had to grab a chicken. Charlie and I walk it down to the shul, take it to the rabbi, and he'd, you know, pick off the feathers around the jugular vein, and he would do the slice and throw them in a big barrel until they got done flopping. Then we knew they were dead. So then Charlie had to pick up these bloody chickens. They were bloodied, I guess would be the better term. Bring them home, okay? And then Mom and I and Charlie would pick all the feathers off, and then it was soaked, and then we used to burn some of the feathers too. It was a terrible odor. So we had a good Jewish education. Mom kept a kosher home. I would say didn't really keep Shabbos the way you were supposed to, but that's I say my dad worked after shul, and so we didn't know. At that time, the families were pretty much involved with with making a living, and that became more of a priority than, like, say, for example, honoring the Sabbath and that type of stuff. But that's the way it was.
We got Christmas gifts when we were small. Did all kinds of things we really shouldn't have done. And my mother had a fireplace, and she decorated the top of the fireplace every year with like a snow scene. And we did hang stockings. And we got gifts on Christmas morning.
Yeah, I remember
when you came over to visit?
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. Anyhow, ours was a totally different situation. The only thing we got on Christmas was because the store sold everything. It said toys and dishes and pots and pans and clothing and furniture and floor, you name it, it was in that store. Well, any toys that were broken, that's what we would get.
Or the ones they didn't sell, no.
Right, they weren't any good. That's what we got. That was the thing we got. And then we go over to their house. Wow, it was like, wholly different. But it's a matter of, let's say, the influence that the parents have, whether it was enough or not at the time. I think with each generation, the younger generation more or less observes the principles of Judaism, and it washes off on the parents.
Well, we still had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at our synagogue, and had Passover Seders at my grandmother's. And another thing I always remember about my grandma was her bowl with the chopper, making the chop liver with the chopper. And yeah, we were very close. My grandmother and I, in fact, when she passed away, she had a ring, engagement ring, and she wanted me to have it. She had other granddaughters also, but unfortunately, I would rather have my mother and my grandmother than the ring. But
when the war came, it was a terrible shock. It was a Sunday of December of '41, and we were listening to the radio. We didn't have there were no TVs. Back in those days, this is my radio. Of course, they announced it, and then 6 months later, in May of '42, is when Sid enlisted as soon as he could. And I just missed it, but anyhow, that was a big change as far as everything goes. Sid was a kamikaze twice. We all had such patriotic fervor then, and we really wanted to join him, but the age difference made it. But I graduated in 3.5 years and got out in, I guess it would have been February of '49, and went to Chicago to find a job in the accounting profession. Couldn't find anything, walked the streets, answered ads, and was just about ready to maybe take a job in private accounting. All this time I was living with my grandmother. She had a one living room apartment with a Murphy inner-door bed, a small bathroom, a little kitchen. It was no more than maybe 5 by 6, and a little dining area. I slept in the dining room on a cot, and she would sleep in this inner bed. She had terrible cancer. I should back up a bit. You should understand our courtship. Interesting. After I got out of college, I was a full-fledged accountant, so I began to do the books for the store, Sandra's dad and my dad's business. And it wasn't that big, wasn't that complicated. So I was doing the books on Saturdays. I drive down from Chicago, and Sandra was the cashier. And so after I got done working, it was about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, somewhere in that time, and I said, I'm going to go to the movie. You want to come along? And so she tagged along. She paid her own way, if I remember right.
Right.
And so we sat in the movie, and that was in the summer of '50. And then came Labor Day of '50. I was studying for the CPA exam up in Chicago, and came down, and they had my dad with his fishing, but this time Sandra's mom and dad, Harry and Sally, came, mom and dad and us, and Sandra had on a pair of shorts, and she has a pretty good figure, but she had a knockout figure. I have the picture of her in a bathing suit, which I kept when I was in the Army. And so then I kind of liked her. And that night we went to a movie. All right.
In LaSalle.
Yeah. Excuse me, in LaSalle, sat in the balcony, and I kissed her. And she kissed me back, and so that's what started. She's got to be what?
I was
50?
I was almost 16.
Yeah. And I'm 20 or 21. Yeah.
21.
When I was drafted, well, the Korean War was what I was drafted in for. And I thought I wouldn't make it because I had punctured eardrums. Hell, didn't make a bit of difference. So we went down to basic training in Leonard Wood, Missouri, opened up old barracks that the Army had shut down back in '45 when the Second War ended. So we were down in St. Louis, and some guy had a car. We all chipped in, and we drove home on that Labor Day night in 1951. I was driving, and the guy came through a stop sign, hit his broadside, killed my friend who owned the car. He was in the U.S. Air Force at ran too. He got the driver of the car who hit us got killed. We all got. I wasn't supposed to live. I had a broken leg, and my foot was through the dashboard, upside down. Our car was turned over, and I'm hanging. Was what they told me anyhow.
Besides the shock.
Yeah.
You can die
So they
from
took
it.
us to a local small hospital,
In Lincoln,
and
Illinois.
Wasn't even at
Lincoln, honey.
Yeah, Lincoln, Illinois. Yeah. And they didn't think I'd live, but all this time when I was unconscious and coma, I'd call out for Sandy.
Anyway, then I found out about the accident, and my parents drove me to the hospital to see Danny. And when we got there, Charlie was coming out of the hospital crying. You know, I don't know if he's going to make it, you know, and he was crying, and I hugged him. And I remember going into the room. My mother sat in a chair crying, and I went and talked to Danny. And he kept saying, he was delirious. He kept saying, San, with his voice shaking. And I held his hand, and I said, he's going to be fine. Because to me, he had to be fine. So I just said, he'll be fine. Charlie, he's going to be fine. And thank God he was. So that was what really started us from being even more serious.
So then I came back to Chicago. I got discharged a little over 2 years after we got in. And that was in late December '52. Went back to Chicago, got my old job back. I started out at $150 a month in '49, and in '52 they made it $300 a month, which was quite good. And Chicago was a great place. In the summer, you could right to the lake because
I went to Northwestern.
Yeah, Edgewater Beach. So you came in the fall, and I would come back home, and we'd date back in LaSalle, go to drive-ins and smooch and do that and have a good time. Then when she went to Northwestern,
You used to leave school for a weekend. You had like to have a written permission almost. And I used to say that I was staying with his aunt or with a relative, whereas really I was staying with him in the apartment.
Yeah, but we did a lot of things. Chicago, you know.
Went to plays. We had a fabulous.
It was a great courtship in that regard. And then we decided to get married, and that was in August We couldn't get married in Illinois, obviously. They wouldn't allow first cousins to get married then. I think there was only like 13 or 14 states. One of them was Texas. So I met some people from Houston, got a job with a CPA firm down there. We were going to move there. That's where we got married, August 12th, 1953. The only ones who were there were our parents, the rabbi,
And his wife.
and a witness, and another couple. That was it. And that's why we came back, because Sandra's mom and dad wanted to have a reception for their friends to, I guess, show.
At the Kaskaskia
Right, so
Hotel, we had a big reception.
Yeah, get more presents or something. First of all, we honeymooned, a great honeymoon. Oh my gosh, went to Galveston, stayed at the Buccaneer Hotel, which is a lovely hotel right on the Gulf. Drove over to New Orleans, stayed at the Roosevelt Hotel, which was the place.
We wouldn't stay at we did not stay at the
Oh, we couldn't get in, that was it.
No.
What was it? It was, okay.
They just had twin beds and we wanted our own bed.
Okay, whatever.
We wanted a double bed, so we went to the St. Charles Hotel.
Okay.
We stayed there.
Boy, you
That's
got
why.
Okay.
That's
Well,
why
we
we
went to the
didn't stay
Roosevelt. They had an evening show. Remember Clyde Thornhill?
Yes.
And we went dancing. We used to do a lot of dancing. We were always dancing. In fact, during our courtship, Sandra would teach me different dances. She taught me how to rumba, and how to samba, how to jitterbug, how to waltz, and how to foxtrot. Those were the dances.
Right.
We came back for this reception, and a friend of my mom's brother was there, and he said there's an opening in Peoria. An old CPA, PA wants to sell. He's losing his eyesight. And Mr. Wooley said, I know the three of you will make a great partnership. And I said, the three of us, there's only Sam and myself. There's only two of us. We're the accountants. He said, well, no, you have to take my son. And he brings in the major. And I said, no, Mr. Williday, if you'd have told me that a few days ago, I wouldn't even be here. I never understood that. So then we walked out, standing on the street. I said, well, Sam, we got nothing, so I guess I'll head back to Houston. He said, no, stick here. I've got a few accounts. We'll start a practice of our own. We don't need anybody. And I said, well, okay. So we had to tell the folks in Houston I wasn't coming back. And that's how we get started. We started out with nothing, basically. And it's one of those situations. That's how professional accounts, that's how professional companies build, I guess. Just how
It worked
how
out.
things change.
It worked out for the best because we were able to be with our family.
Yeah, that was.
At first, it didn't seem to matter to
Right,
me.
'cause
As
we had
long
no-
as I was with Danny, I could have cared where I lived.
Right.
That's the way I felt at that time.
Right.
It was good for us to have come back and spent all the time with our family, you know.
And then, of course, Sandra got pregnant, and she was no longer the secretary, but we had rented this apartment. Again, there was no air conditioning in those days, and everybody's bedroom was in that whole apartment building faced each other. It was like, and of course, you had windows open, you had the shades drawn, but the windows were open because there's no way to get any air in the place. And Beth, was a colic. She cried every 2 hours, every day, every night, every 2 hours. And even though we had a lease, the owner of the building says,
Asked us to leave.
yeah, you're gonna have to leave. I said, my lease says I can stay here till this coming September. This was in June. He said, no, you can't, because if you don't take that kid out of here, I'm gonna lose every client. We went looking for a home, but he showed us this home, and it was.
And we fell in love with it.
Right. For $28,000. It was air conditioned, but it was water cooled. It wasn't air cooled. Nice, modern building home. A lot of bedrooms, small, but 2 bathrooms, more than we thought we'd ever need. And so we bought it. Mom and Dad, I don't think any of our parents liked the house. They thought we made they didn't They couldn't see us paying with $28,000. They couldn't see us paying that kind of money for this.
No basement, no garage.
No basement, no garage, and a gravel driveway. No,
It was gravel, the driveway.
right. Yeah. And so that's how we started. Of course, and it was so easy then to raise kids because the kids weren't that demanding. I think we had TV. Mouseketeers, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
They
And
watched
Captain Kangaroo. And
Yeah. So.
there was that local show, too, I forgot.
Yeah, Salty Sam.
Salty Sam.
Yeah, and Captain somebody or other. Yeah, but anyhow, they just seem to get along, and
We had wonderful, wonderful birthday parties for the girls. I just had dolls, and and I always made the cake decorated to the theme. And yes, they had wonderful birthday parties, and their friends always here. I specifically remember one of Lewis's parties that I made TP peanut butter, and it was an Indian theme. TP peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like a teepee and all that. And each one a hat with a feather, and had that theme for one of his. And that's when one of his gifts was a hamster, whose name was Pal, and he had it in his room. Should I tell that story?
I don't know.
And one evening, I had ladies here for bridge, and the hamster got out of the cage. And this one lady was in the bathroom using the bathroom, and the hamster came up through the floor vent and kind of frightened her.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah. They had great parties.
Right.
Yeah, I did for my kids. I enjoyed it. All our kids were so blessed with 3 fabulous kids.
Well, and they went to Hebrew school after school.
Sure.
I don't think it started until they were like 8 years old or something like that.
Yeah, we carpooled for Hebrew school.
Right. And then we'd go to the shul was only like about 3/4 of a mile away, and we'd walk to shul on Shabbos. Mm-hmm. And now Bela was she was a free spirit.
She was always looking for things. Even when she was little, she wasn't satisfied.
Right.
So she said she was going to run away. So Danny actually packed a suitcase, heavy. And it was kind of snowy in it. She started trudging through the snow with this suitcase. Didn't get too far.
She got about she got about maybe 10, 20 feet out the door, and it's snowing, and she's sitting on the suitcase. She wouldn't come in. She was going to go for. So I forgot about that. Yeah.
But anyway, she was not religious at all.
Right.
But then when she got to college, and went to Israel for that summer, and fell in love with Judaism, and that's how she ended up getting so religious and becoming a much happier person. And then Lou, one time, there was a big snowstorm, and the kids were outside. He was pretty small. The kids were outside playing in the snow, and our neighbor, Louis actually got stuck in the snow. And our neighbor went and next door, Ralph King.
Oh, really?
He heard him crying and got him. That was a little frightening. He was easygoing. He was quite a kid. He had a terrific little sense of humor. He still does. But when we went out west and we're driving and looking at everything, he said, "Well, look at that, Lou." And he said, "Oh, Mom, when you've seen one mountain, you've seen them all." He was only 7 years old. So he got kind of tired.
The kids were always good students. They never, Sally may have been the only one. She was a terrific student, but it turned out she had gone up through about
3rd grade, and we weren't aware that she had a reading problem until 3rd grade.
Right.
And then we took her to a special class, extracurricular class for her to learn to read, and she ended up doing very well there. Remember?
I'll say.
Yeah, but
she became an avid reader.
And her personality made her really go far. because she had such a terrific personality, and she really excelled and has excelled in her profession. You know, but she had to work harder for all her grades.
The way you measure the goodness in life is the fact that there's a harmony between all the family members. That's, you know, that there's never a discord. There's, you know, every marriage. Well, you're too young yet, but after several years, you're going to run into a situation where there's a disagreement and that type of thing, and that happens. But the whole point is, I am so confident and so pleased and so blessed, and that's what more can you ask from having lived all these years and been blessed with all these things, and that's what happened. And I think the beauty of it all is that each generation, as I said a moment ago, each generation builds on their upbringing, on their observances, and on their beliefs, and they go even further. That's the thing that's really so gratifying to me.
We certainly have been very, very fortunate through the years. Our kids, our grandkids are the best. And our sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, grandsons-in-law, and granddaughters-in-law, they're all terrific. I think we did something right, because look at all this. Look at our kids. Look at our grandkids. We did something right. And one thing about Danny and our relationship, I told my kids from the get-go, he comes first. And he always has. And he always will.
I would say this in all honesty. There's no one in the world who is as blessed as Sandra and I. And I mean that sincerely. We're thankful, humble, and there's no one in the world I'd rather be. And there's no other woman I'd rather have.